Good evening, everyone. I'm Barbara Beckert with Disability Rights Wisconsin. On behalf of the Wisconsin Disability Vote Coalition, thank you for joining us for tonight's forum. We thank the candidates for joining us and look forward to hearing from them. A few ground rules. ASL interpreters are available. The training is live captioned. To use captioning, you can click on the CC icon on your screen and click Show Subtitles, or you also have the option to view the full transcript. If you need support, please use the chat. We accepted questions before the forum and are unable to take additional questions at this time. Thank you to everyone who submitted questions. The Wisconsin Disability Vote Coalition is a nonpartisan effort to help ensure full participation in the electoral process of voters with disabilities. Wisconsinites with disabilities vote at a lower rate than other voters. Many report barriers. We are working to change that. The coalition is coordinated by Disability Rights Wisconsin and the Wisconsin Board for People with Developmental Disabilities, and includes many organizations and individuals. Join us in this important work. Sign up for our email list and check out our website and Facebook page. We'd love to have you sign on as a supporting membership and work with us to turn out the disability vote and address barriers. Going to go to the next slide. Make sure you have a plan to vote in the April 6th election. It's an important election and coming up quickly. Registration deadlines are shown here. By mail or online, you must register by March 17th, in person by April 6th, which is Election Day, and you can register at your clerk's office until April 2nd. Absentee voting is important to many voters with disabilities. Don't delay, request your absentee ballot as soon as possible. The deadline is April 1st by 5 p.m., but that doesn't leave you enough time to get your ballot and get it in on time. So at this point, we want to take a minute to recognize our co-sponsors who helped to make tonight's program possible. Mental Health America Wisconsin, the Milwaukee Coalition for Children's Mental Health, the Milwaukee Mental Health Task Force, NAMI Wisconsin, People First Wisconsin, Survival Coalition of Wisconsin Disability Organizations, the Wisconsin Coalition of Independent Living Centers, Wisconsin Council of the Blind and Visually Impaired, and Wisconsin Family Ties. Thank you all for your partnership in supporting tonight's forum. Now I'm going to turn it over to my partner in the coalition, Jenny Newgard of the Wisconsin BPDD.
Thank you, Barbara. I'd like to thank the candidates, Dr. Jill Underly and Dr. Deborah Kerr, for joining us today to share their perspective with the disability community, and thanks to all of you for your commitment to being informed voters. The next state superintendent of public instruction will play a very important role in policy and budget decisions that will impact students, schools, and communities across Wisconsin. Tonight's forum will provide an opportunity for the candidates to share how they plan to address the needs of students with disabilities, to advance full inclusion, and to close the gaps these students experience. Thank you again to everyone who submitted questions. We received great questions from all over the state and did our best to ensure that the final questions incorporated your input. Our moderator tonight is Charlotte DeLeste. Charlotte is an award-winning journalist in Madison, where she anchors the 6 and 10 broadcast at News 3 Now. She is the co-founder of Gio's Garden, a therapeutic respite care center for children with special needs, named after her son Gio, who has significant special needs. Thank you, Charlotte, for sharing your time and talents to facilitate this important conversation.
Thank you all. for having me here tonight. I look forward to facilitating this conversation with the candidates and learning about their vision for students with disabilities. I'm particularly interested in this because, as Jenny mentioned before, I do have a son with severe special needs and who is in the Wisconsin school system here. And I also have a younger sister who has special needs as well. She is in Missouri, and I have seen for the past nearly 50 years what the special needs world is like, what it looks like to have kids in an inclusive environment and to not. So it's really interesting to see how this world has unfolded and how it will continue to unfold. We will have opening and closing statements from the candidates tonight, and we have 17 questions that we hope to cover. I'm going to read each question, and it will also be shown on the PowerPoint on your screen. We're going to alternate the sequence in which the candidates respond. We will start in alphabetical order. I am going to state the length of time for responses to each question. It'll either be 1 minute or 2. Messages will display below to show the time remaining for the candidates who are speaking. When candidates see a message stating time is up, that is when we're going to ask you to start wrapping up your sentence. And then we're going to have the other candidate become the speaker. And we're not going to introduce each speaker to minimize those transitions. So we're going to begin now with question number 1. Candidates, we would like for you to introduce yourself in 1 minute, who you are, and why you want to serve in this role. In alphabetical order, we will begin with Dr. Kerr.
Thank you so much and welcome everyone tonight. I am excited to run for Wisconsin State Superintendent of Public Instruction because I have a vision to create a world-class education system that is the highest performing in the country and for the best opportunities for all of our students. We will accomplish this through our Wisconsin Promise, where we will know each student by name, strength, passion, and need, ready to graduate into a future that they choose. I'm public school dedicated for 34 years. I've worked in all sectors of education. I'm parochial educated. I taught in private schools, and I've been in public education and a state superintendent for 20 years. I'm an award-winning teacher and principal, high school athletic director, back-to-back state basketball coach, and I'm excited to run for this position because our kids are not winning right now, and I have a plan to make that happen.
Right. Good evening, everybody. Hi, I'm Jill Underly, the superintendent of the Pecatonica Area School District in Southwest Wisconsin. I'm running for state superintendent because I believe that every child, every day, should have access to a great public education and a solid foundation for which kids can live the rest of their lives. As a former teacher, principal, and now as a local superintendent, I have a proven record of high student achievement and innovation in my school district. I've been a leader in the state by offering full-day, high-quality preschool and childcare to all families because high-quality preschool helps all kids perform better in school and helps families who struggle with childcare costs. As superintendent, I'll look to expand this to all kids. Throughout the last year, I've safely led my school district through a very challenging time during the pandemic. I'm the only candidate who has done that. I've worked hard to safely reopen the schools in my district for in-person learning because I know how critical it is to our kids' education as well as to our workforce and our economy. That's why safely reopening schools will be a priority for me. And that's why I'm running for state superintendent.
Thank you. What does school inclusion mean to you, and how would you promote it as state superintendent? 1 minute.
All right. Well, an inclusive classroom climate or school inclusion refers to an environment where all students feel supported academically and intellectually and are extended a sense of belonging in the classroom regardless of their identity or their learning preferences or in education. And really, that's what our society is. We intend for our society to be inclusive, and it really starts really young with kids. And so that's why, I support inclusive classrooms, and that's what we have in my current school district. And I advocate for that every day.
Dr. Kerr?
This is a great question. As the superintendent of the Brown Deer School District for 13 years, one of the most diverse school districts in the state of Wisconsin, with over 80% students of color and 50% economically disadvantaged, we had a very high percentage of special needs children. And so inclusion means being a part of, and every child is an essential part of a school community. And we created that school culture through inclusive practices such as planning to co-teach and co-serve all of our kids. We had regular ed teachers working with special needs teachers to teach all of our kids, no matter what their disability was. We had all of the categories of the disabilities represented in Brown Deer, and we were proud to serve all of them. We are excited to be part of this national character education program that creates this inclusive culture, and I plan to do that as the next state superintendent.
While all students have experienced disruption of their education due to the COVID-19 pandemic, students with disabilities have faced additional challenges. What do you see as the role of the state superintendent in addressing this situation moving forward? For this question, you have 2 minutes.
This is a very important question because this is going to determine our future. I'm the only candidate that's come out with a statewide reentry plan for all kids. I want schools to open today. Our parents are fatigued and they're frustrated and they're overwhelmed with all the extra responsibilities that they have had to take on through this COVID-19. And so I do a shout out to all of you parents out there. You've been amazing heroes in trying to juggle childcare, and school and any kind of employment and job. So we want to make sure all of our kids are being served well. And I think the first part of therapy is bringing back all of our kids to school because that's what our kids need, especially our children with disabilities who need specialized attention that really can't be given over Zoom. It needs one-to-one interaction. It needs personal experiences. It needs teachers caring and supporting and interacting in a very personal way to help all our kids learn and grow and feel safe. And we can do this safely and sensibly because the science shows that we can reopen our schools and that the kids are not the spreaders of the disease. And so with vaccinations coming through with teachers, we can make sure this can happen, especially for all of our children with disabilities, because our parents need this support. So I would work as the state superintendent to make sure that all kids are served immediately by reopening our schools.
All right, great. So I know the value of in-person learning. It's better for our kids, it's better for our families, our economy, our community. And that's why I've worked really hard with our teachers and our school board to make sure that we've had our schools open. I'm the only candidate who is running a school district right now during the pandemic, and I know what it takes to get our schools open and keep them open. And everyone wants their schools open. The kids do, especially. They want to be in school for their to see their friends, to participate in activities, and the teachers want to teach in person too. My schools have been open basically this entire year because we were able to do so safely. Through social distancing mostly, but then we also had to hire additional staff. Families and parents want their kids to go to school, and it's important that we meet all the learners' needs in that environment too. So in these cases, we've had to vaccinate our teachers. It's also that the challenge is the kids need to catch up. I get that. I'm more concerned about their social emotional health, especially this summer. I know lots of parents, I'm speaking to parents all the time about how they would love to have an actual summer vacation. And so I'm ready to lead on day one to make sure we put equity first and get the kids the resources that they need to succeed.
Thank you. IDEA is a law that makes available a free, appropriate public education to eligible children with disabilities throughout the nation and ensures special education and related services to those children. Now, given that the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act does not apply in private schools, a student who takes a special needs private school voucher forfeits a host of federal rights and protections. Do you support or oppose the use of public funds for private school voucher programs? What, if any, accountability measures do you support for voucher schools that accept public funding to educate students with disabilities? 2 minutes.
Sure. So as far as do I support or oppose, I oppose the use of public funds for private school voucher programs. As far as accountability measures that I support having transparency on our tax bills, for example, of how much money is actually going into the private school voucher program. I also support holding our voucher schools to the same accountability as our public schools, and that includes the same opt-out rates, for example, for testing. I also would support having all the kids in the voucher school take the, the same accountability tests that the kids in the public school have to take as well, and publishing those results. So there's other things too, of course, that public schools are held to that private schools are not, such as, by statute and licensing requirements as well. But I mean, as far as when you look at the differences, ultimately, like you said, students with disabilities do forfeit their rights once they are enrolled. They can't, the voucher school cannot discriminate, when they're looking at their admissions, for example, but once they're in, that's another story. So choice schools, they're not required to meet students' special needs like in public schools. The day they enter the private school as a student, they don't have the same protections as they would in a public school. So, I support the accountability system, but ultimately I would, I unequivocally support public school dollars staying in public schools.
Dr. Kerr?
In my role as superintendent of Brown Deer School District, I closed down my schools on March 13th last year, and it'll be a day I'll never forget, where I had to tell my staff of 250 employees that we were closing down. And my school was 4K through 12th grade, 1,600 students. And so we all had to become social workers and feed the kids, make sure they had tech devices and support the teachers, all in a weekend. And so I was also a COVID-19 superintendent, and I've been integrally involved with my colleagues since I've left the Brown Deer School District. I'm also the immediate past president of our National Superintendents Association, which was an elected position, and I'm still on the National COVID Task Force team that has been creating scenario plans and handbooks for schools to use. So I am very well prepared and knowledgeable about the pandemic and what's needed to be done. And that's why I want our schools to get back in session right away, because we're ready to do that. But in addition to that, I wanted to address this question. I do believe that we have to support all children across Wisconsin. That is the job of the state superintendent. The superintendent oversees all of these schools. I do agree that we need to have one system of full accountability, transparency, and equitable access for all of the kids who are involved in all schools across our state. What I would like to do is bring all the stakeholders to the table and talk about that. And what does that look like? What does accountability metrics, what are those important pieces? How does funding work to support? So I agree that all of our kids should take the Wisconsin Forward test. They should be measured using the state school report card. But there are some other measures that we can look at that indicate student achievement and how well kids are learning.
Many school districts struggle to provide adequate special education services with limited financial support from the state and federal governments. Currently, Wisconsin schools transfer over $1 billion a year from the general fund to cover mandated but unreimbursed special education services. What do you think DPI's role is in closing the special ed funding gap, and what will you do to accomplish this? 2 minutes, Dr. Kerr.
I know this issue very well. Like I said, Brown Deer had a very high percentage of children with disabilities, way higher than the state average. And then we also had a housing development come in that was serving disabled adults and their families. And so we worked joyfully with all of those families and students to serve them in our school. What I've learned through this journey is that the state has really fallen back on their support of children with disabilities over the last 10 years. They have reduced the funding for special education students and have not fulfilled their promise for 2/3 funding. what I would do as the next state superintendent is I would work towards 90% reimbursement for special education, because that 90% reimbursement would free up regular education dollars to meet the needs of the other programs that are going on in the school. I support the Blue Ribbon Commission committee to address this issue, but also the current state superintendent, Carolyn Sanford Taylor, in her desire to increase this reimbursement over time. And I think we can get to that 90% reimbursement over the next 2 biennial budgets, but it's going to take commitment on all of us to advocate for more funds for our special needs children, because their needs are unique and more complex than ever due to the pandemic, due to the situations going on in society. And so it's important that we meet the kids where they are and make sure that we have adequate funding, whether it's dealing with trauma, making sure that they have food, making sure that their living requirements are adequate. And so it's important that we increase the funding to free up the regular education dollars for our kids.
Right. So as Dr. Kerr said, absolutely. Our special education funding has lagged in reimbursement the past 20 years. Really since 1993, when the school funding formula was changed, we had a promise for 2/3 funding, and that promise has gone unrealized. What most people don't realize is that with special education funds, whatever we spend out of Fund 27, we have to make whole at the end of the school year. And therefore, every district in Wisconsin transfers a large sum of money out of their general fund, which takes from all students, including students with disabilities, and puts it in special education, because we don't get reimbursed very much. It's about 28% currently. So Governor Evers has proposed 60% reimbursement for special education. Nearly every district, like I said, as far as I'm aware, transfers money from their general fund. My school district transfers $500,000 every year. And when you think about that, if we were reimbursed at 60% as is proposed, or 90%, which would be immediately ideal and just amazing, that money would then stay in our general fund, and it could be used for things like teacher salaries, reducing class size, providing more services to kids, building improvements, for example. So what would I do to accomplish this? I would certainly advocate and continue to work with our legislature and our families to fully understand the cost of special education, and work statewide to ensure that everyone understands this, that all means all, and that a higher reimbursement rate will positively impact all kids. 90%, like I said, and like Dr. Kerr said too, would be excellent. Our district passed a resolution to reimburse at 90%. I also was expert testimony at the Blue Ribbon Commission, and those remarks were in the 2018 report. And I would continue to advocate, again, for all of this statewide.
Funding inequities between districts has been an ongoing contributor to inequities in educational outcomes for students. What proposals could you offer as state superintendent to help remedy these disparities? 1 minute.
All right, so my platform is really based in this, and it's rooted in disrupting the systems of inequity that plague our public school system. So some of the programs that I would propose helps all kids, and I think of the first one, which would be early childhood programming. We need to expand it. We need full day, 4K every day, like in my school district currently. Initially, it was to mitigate open enrollment, but really what it ended up doing was providing educational opportunities for all kids that lifted them all up, provides early interventions, behavior, speech, OT, PT. So really excited about that. Other programs would include, teacher recruitment best practices and trying to retain the best and brightest in our classrooms as well. Mental health funding, increasing the services to all our kids for mental health. Especially all of these needs existed before the pandemic, but now they've just been amplified during the pandemic as well. But lastly, I would certainly be advocating for a better school funding formula so that we can make sure that we eliminate these opportunity gaps once and for all.
Dr. Kerr, go ahead.
I also agree with Dr. Underly about the early childhood and 4K programs. I've had the opportunity to create 2 4-year-old kindergarten programs in both of the school districts that I served as superintendent. And both of those programs were community-based programs so that they could include the parents and the children and working together to close the achievement gap before it even starts. One of my main areas of focus on my campaign is literacy, and I think we need to ensure success of all of our kids through this lens of excellence and equity. And this is going to be achieved through a laser focus on continuous improvement in literacy. I think one of the greatest challenges we're facing right now is the COVID slide and the achievement gaps that have been exacerbated by this unrelenting pandemic. And so we need a literacy roadmap that's going to provide quality instruction using the science of reading to get our kids off the worst list across the country of having the largest achievement gaps between Black and Brown students.
As a result of, as the state education agency, DPI has the obligation to ensure that local districts meet all the requirements of IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. So as state superintendent, what measures would you implement when a district repeatedly fails to meet its obligations? You have 2 minutes for this question. Dr. Kerr?
First of all, this is a very serious problem when a school gets on this list for the very first time. And so instead of blaming the school district for their lack of results, I think we need to work as partners. And we need to measure and look at the metrics early on before they even get to this point. However, if they do get on this list, they need support and help. And so the state superintendent needs to surround them with great expertise and resources to help their staff improve and do better. And I think when I talked about the continuous improvement model, that's what you do. You look at what metrics need to be improved and you put the resources in just the right places to make that happen. And so we want all kids in all schools to have a great high quality education. But when a school system is failing, there's reasons for that. And it's not the children's fault. It needs to be addressed. And we need to say, you know what, we're going to fix this. We're going to work on this together. And so as state superintendent, I would make sure that those school districts have the resources they need. They might need staff development. They might need different types of staffing. They might need someone like myself or a member of my cabinet team to be there helping them hands-on to make those changes and understand the context in which they're working. But we want all schools to be successful because high tides raise all boats.
Yeah, as somebody who has worked at the Department of Public Instruction, this is something that I'm all too familiar with. We've had to look at how to provide corrective action to school districts for lots of reasons. Civil rights, for example, Title I, IDEA for sure. And Wisconsin school districts struggle because we do not have as many resources as we need, especially in the schools that need it the most. So in addition to corrective action and providing the resources and the staffing, perhaps from the State Department of Public Instruction, to go to our schools, maybe it is, providing training, providing more resources, getting additional assistance, perhaps needs assessments, whatever it is. That's what the State Department of Public Instruction should be doing to help these schools, because again, ultimately, it's the kids who need the help. So again, corrective action could be lots of different things. I don't feel that it needs to be something where, we're, for example, if, we're not going to come in and close a school. Really, the whole role of DPI is to be helpful and to provide assistance, because ultimately we want all kids to be successful and we want all schools to succeed.
Thank you. As a result of Act 118 in 2019, DPI recently published data on the use of restraint and seclusion in our schools. Alarmingly, about 80% of the use of these techniques are on students with disabilities. Parents and disability advocates believe there needs to be a change in school culture, attitude, with a strong focus on alternatives to seclusion and restraint. The question is, what actions will you take as superintendent to help schools transition to more effective and humane strategies to address challenging behaviors, reducing the use of seclusion and restraint? 2 minutes.
Yes, I agree. Every effort should be made to prevent the need for use of restraint and for the use of seclusion. Certainly there's some proactive practices that could, or proactive approaches that could be taken. For example, providing training on de-escalation techniques, for example. Perhaps every school should have an established multi-tiered system of support that would incorporate school-wide approaches, for example. Also data-based, data-driven decision making whenever it should be seclusion or restraint used. But, when I think about early interventions and I think about early childhood programming and I think about the social emotional skills that we teach kids in elementary school, I think that they're certainly implementing curriculum that teach these skills and coping strategies, especially. We should be establishing systems that are certainly intentional about keeping students connected and engaged with their peers and their adults in their school, but also just having expectations and well-developed policies as well for our kids, so that also staff know the expectations too. And when seclusion and restraint is used, it's only used in those instances when it is absolutely most needed and when a child is in danger of harming themselves or others.
Dr. Kerr, go ahead.
Thank you. I was very sad to see this data that was published a couple weeks ago. Very disheartening, because that's not the kind of school culture we want to have, and we don't want our kids to experience any other additional kind of stress in our schools. And I do agree that we need to continue to have training in crisis prevention and strategies to de-escalate kids, because we want them to be self-managed. We need them to make really great decisions on how to handle themselves. But sometimes these traumas manifest themselves in ways that we just can't predict as educators. And so that's why it's good to have a multifaceted approach in dealing with our kids who have these kinds of issues, and sometimes our adults. So I do not believe in seclusion and restraint unless it's absolutely necessary. But there are some other calming type strategies that can be used. Walking down the hall with a mentor or a friend, using a room that has been created to allow kids to use light in different ways, a sensory room, for example, or going to a place where they can make individual choices to use different sensory modalities and things like that. And so I think it's very important that we are aware of the data and make sure that our teachers and our educators and our superintendents across the state of Wisconsin understand, here are the resources, here are the things that you can do, and there needs to be ongoing training. And so in the Brown Deer School District, we made sure that every year we had annual training, but we've circled back to it every month during our professional development. And I think those are the types of things that our teachers and our educators need to be more aware of.
Wisconsin has serious racial disparities in reading achievement, graduation rates, and disciplinary actions, which are magnified for students with disabilities. How would you address these disparities as Wisconsin's next state superintendent? And there are 2 minutes for this question. Dr. Kerr, we'll begin with you.
First of all, it takes the courage to accept that we all have achievement gaps. We all have disparities, whether it's between children with disabilities, free and reduced lunch, or Black and brown and white children. And so we need to address it and have the courage to make the change. And so that's exactly what I did in Brown Deer. We closed achievement gaps, we raised achievement, and we had the highest graduation rates of Black and brown and white kids graduating at almost 100% in the last couple of years. And so it takes a focus on what the root cause analysis are in terms of these issues. And so we started looking at our discipline data. And it was very sobering to find out that we were suspending some of our children 5 to 6 times more than our others. And so we had to realize that that was unacceptable and inappropriate. And then we put in character education to help our kids and our families and our educators to learn that we are going to respect and be responsible, and we're going to work together to create this new school culture that has student voice and that is inclusive for all kids. And so every school district needs to understand that these are disparities, but they can be eliminated if we focus on the right thing. You know, our kids in Wisconsin have a lot of room to grow, especially our Black and brown kids in the area of literacy. And we need to have a laser focus on literacy, in my opinion, so that we can get these kids learning at a higher level, because reading is the gateway to all future education and being successful in our society. And so we need to use evidence-based practices so that we can align the resources and the assessments to get better outcomes, because we've had these same outcomes for a long time, and these need to be changed.
Yes, I believe that every child, regardless of their race, their abilities, their gender, needs to be successful in reading. And yes, it translates to higher graduation rates. It translates to better health and better economic prospects as they grow. And my platform is rooted in these equity initiatives. And equity isn't just an initiative. It's a way of being. It's a way of leading. We must unpack how racism, sexism, ableism, classism, and other marginalizing ideologies are woven into the makeup of literally everything in our schools, in our classrooms, in our schools, our districts, our curriculum, how schools can make things better and make change, for example, and extricate themselves from these patterns. The focus of my platform and agenda is on school improvement and instructional practice through an equity lens. As state superintendent, my goals will be to wield the power of DPI to help school leaders and educators learn how to detect and, most importantly, disrupt these systems of inequity and oppression and unfairness that are in their daily structures that ensure, and therefore then we need to ensure that all kids get the care and the opportunities they need to realize their full potential every day. Parallel to this, my charge will be to take this message statewide to parents, to communities, school boards, and businesses. Enough is enough. We can't thrive as a society when our children cannot thrive, and we have to conquer this mountain. Again, you know, my entire platform with the early childhood programming, for example, early intervention. I have a child with special needs. He's on the autism spectrum, and early intervention in speech and language and OT and PT were instrumental in him being successful in his elementary years. And all parents and all kids deserve these opportunities. But we need to keep also talented professionals in our classrooms. We need to give kids more access to mental health. And we really need to fix our school funding formula so that all kids can get these opportunities to be successful, no matter their zip code, every day.
Thank you. The presence of school resource officers in schools is strongly correlated with higher incidence of law enforcement referral and arrest. School-related arrest disproportionately impacts students with disabilities who are also students of color. What steps would you take to stem the school to prison pipeline? 2 minutes.
All right. Yeah, so the school to prison pipeline has devastated far too many Black and brown children, and especially if these children have disabilities, right? That just amplifies their odds that they will be interacting in a negative manner with law enforcement. And we absolutely must put a stop to it. We need to turn away from expulsions and suspensions, especially in elementary school. It's unacceptable that we would suspend or expel a child at that age. We also need to bring in programs such as restorative justice, especially into our middle school and high school, but certainly K-12. It could benefit all kids. And therefore that would support, our school discipline system. It would provide, if we could provide our schools with more mental health professionals, as well as the resources so that we could be proactive, for example, in supporting our students instead of reactive. I really feel, though, that, when you look at school resource officers, they're not used to the potential, I think, that was initially intended. There's certainly a role, but I don't feel it should be, as somebody who's walking the halls to, say gotcha to the kids and escort them off in handcuffs or anything like that. Really, a school resource officer should be just another member of the staff there to build relationships with kids, to be part of the student support team with school counselors and school psychologists, social workers, and their teachers, as well as their principals, to be another resource and to be another connection to the community to build relationships for all kids.
Dr. Kerr, go ahead.
Okay. First of all, we did have school resource officers in Brown Deer for many years, but they were a part of our staff. They worked with our teachers. They worked with our kids. They did lunch duty. They did playground duty. They worked with small groups of kids and interventions for reading. They were part of our teaching team because they were a vital partner to understanding what was going on in the community. And so we always worked collaboratively. They attended all of our in-services and training, whether we were doing trauma-sensitive care or learning how to teach reading. They were there taking part in those trainings and in-services because they were an employee of the staff. I agree with Dr. Underly that restorative justice practices are needed. They are essential because kids should not be suspended at the rate they're being suspended to this day because they're doing some things that maybe have escalated to a point where a policy has been written. And so in Brown Deer, we wrote non-negotiable policies on how to deal with our students, our teachers, and we also implemented an equity policy that says this is how we're going to behave. This is how we're going to treat all of our kids and our families. Education is a vital part of the school to prison pipeline to stop it. And so parents and partners are essential. We had many programs at the school, even on Saturdays, to help parents with understanding how to deal with your middle school student, or what are some community service opportunities that they might have in the community. And so again, it's working hand in hand with parents as partners and making sure that all kids are valued and respected.
In virtually every indicator of school success, students with emotional or behavioral disabilities rank at the bottom. They have the highest suspension rate and second lowest graduation rate of any disability group. If elected, what specific actions will you take to close the gap in educational outcomes for students with mental health needs? 2 minutes, Dr. Kerr.
We did this in Brown Deer by making sure that our students had all the resources that they need. We partnered with mental health clinicians so they could be in the school to help train our teachers and how to work with our kids. And so I think about one provider that worked in the elementary school. He would come in and watch our students in the classroom and then help our teachers understand maybe some of the types of practices that were needed to best deal with any student that was having a mental health situation. The other part of it, it's a family situation where we need collaboration from the student and the family and the educators working with the child. It's very important that this continues to be addressed so that kids have the supports that they need and that they feel safe and that they feel cared for. We created a special room in our elementary school that would allow our parents and our families to meet with these mental health clinicians at all different hours in the school day, before and after school, and on the weekends. So again, it's looking at your community. What are the specialists that can help support you, whether it's a combination of school social workers or school counselors and the mental health professionals, to make sure that there's a plan and that there's a plan written so that we get better outcomes and that our kids get better at education, because if their mental health needs aren't addressed, they're not going to learn.
So specific steps that I would take to address the mental health concerns and close the gaps for our students with those needs would be to first I could, certainly we could advocate for more school counselors and mental health professionals in our school to provide more resources, for example, directly to our school district so they can make these hires. Working with our colleges and schools of education, for example, in educational psychology to recruit more individuals into these professions, because we know that there's a shortage, certainly, of these professionals statewide in our schools. We could also partner with community organizations and promote parent and family involvement in a more meaningful way, in a more community-centered approach. Certainly, we could harness federal funding that's available, such as AODA through Title IV, and put those resources into prevention and wellness for kids, especially when it comes to drug abuse, for example, and also promoting healthy habits. Certainly, we could provide grants to school districts for programming and resources. We could certainly also provide training to all school staff in trauma-informed care, for example. There's other things that I think of, when we look at how the important role that counselors play as part of a student support team. They're the utility fielders in our building. They're, teaching protective behaviors to kids, but they're also there, teaching social skills and leading restorative justice circles as well. So there's lots of different things we could do, but, certainly we need to harness everything that we have available in order to provide a safety net for our kids who struggle with mental health needs and provide them the opportunity and resources so that they can be successful.
The academic, social, and emotional needs of students with disabilities are diverse, complex, and highly specialized. For example, what students with intellectual disabilities need to thrive often differs dramatically from what students who are blind, visually impaired need to succeed. How can Wisconsin schools better serve these diverse needs to promote success for all students with disabilities? What is DPI's role in supporting this success? 1 minute for this question. Dr. Underly, you begin.
Yeah, as I just briefly shared, this is a very personal question for me because I do have a child with special needs. And, certainly when you look at how our schools can serve kids with disabilities, a lot of things come to mind and a lot of changes we've made just to make sure kids feel included and they feel seen and they feel safe. When you think about the positive experiences for students with disabilities, you have to also look at the students who are neurotypical in their classroom as well. And when you look at, students prefer to be interacting with peers, that are like them. And we sometimes have to disrupt that. We have to, in order to prevent bullying, for example, we need to find inclusive practices like co-teaching and teacher efficacy. We need to include students with disabilities, and especially those with learning disabilities, into clubs like esports or things like the Champion Games, UDL, Universal Design for Learning. Sorry, I realize time is up.
Thank you, Dr. Underly. Dr. Kerr?
You talked up fast. I believe it's absolutely imperative that the DPI supports our educators to do whatever is needed to create a successful learning experience for our children with disabilities. It's all about learning and growing, and then deciding what kind of job or what kind of career could our students aspire to and be very successful to be a contributing member of our society. And so I think it's very important that we continue to share ideas. And I would like the DPI to become a resource, like a clearinghouse where people could put ideas down, where they could share what they've done with their students. And I think it's important for our teachers and our leaders to share ideas that have been effective in partnering with parents and community organizations, because all of our kids are important. All means all in serving our kids.
Students with blindness and vision loss require specially trained professionals to teach Braille literacy, access technology and orientation, and mobility skills. Currently, many school districts, particularly small and the rural districts, do not have these professionals on staff and must contract for these services. In addition, there is a significant worker shortage of these highly trained professionals. So this leads to heavy caseloads for existing professionals and interrupted service for students. How can DPI address the shortage of qualified professionals needed to enhance the success of these students? 2 minutes for this question, and Dr. Kerr, we'll begin with you.
First of all, I can really speak to this. I had a student in my small rural school, Wilmot Grade School, that needed Braille and extra attention. And Danny was a wonderful student, but I needed to provide these services, though that service was essential for him to be successful in school. I relied on our CISA, our regional education agency, to help me find the right qualified people and teachers to work with him. And I think that's going to be the key, using our area regional CISA agencies to make sure that there's support there. But we need to work with our teacher training programs and our universities to make sure that we're recruiting more people into this profession. The other idea I have is I think we need to look at policy that would allow some of our retired teachers and leaders in this area to help support the need until we can build up the pipeline and have more capacity to serve all of these kids. But I know this is very difficult. It's a very high shortage area, but these kids deserve to have that success too. I also believe there's other opportunities to be creative and think outside the box. Maybe there's some other ways that we can partner with other professional associations, like all of you that are on this call tonight, to make sure our kids are being served, and maybe utilizing other types of foundations to find the right kind of support and funding to allow these programs to happen.
Yeah, the School for the Blind and the School for the Deaf are DPI run schools. And so there is already that automatic connection, I think, as far as they have a vested interest in making sure that they're successful, just not just because of the kids who attend, but because it's an imperative for the entire state, these schools, and I think about the licensing shortages that we have in general. One of the strategies that I've thought of is that, for example, American Sign Language should be perhaps taught as a foreign language, and kids in high school and middle school could take it for credit. That would automatically create a pipeline for interpreters and deaf and hard of hearing teachers, for example. And then working with our UW system to ensure that we have the programs throughout the state, not necessarily based just in Madison, in Milwaukee, but perhaps in Green Bay or in Park Falls or in Platteville and La Crosse. So there's things that we could do, strategies that we can implement just to make sure that the kids, all kids, I should say, are successful. And we can do better at recruiting individuals by establishing a stronger pipeline into the profession, starting with high school ASL classes, for example.
School districts are increasingly finding it hard to attract, hire, and retain qualified special education teachers statewide, and especially special education teachers of color. What is the role of the Superintendent of Public Instruction in ensuring all districts have qualified and culturally representative special education staff? 1 minute, Dr. Underly.
Yeah, first and foremost, our kids need teachers who look like them. My first step would actually be to appoint a full-time equity officer at the cabinet level who would oversee needs such as this, needs of equity, needs assessment, and perform these audits and work in partnership with our school districts at the district level to identify the areas and implement the strategies and policies for teacher recruitment and retention. Yes, plain and simple, we need to do better at recruiting more teachers of color and a diverse workforce through programs such as Educators Rising, for example, but also look at student loan forgiveness. Was that the buzzer?
No, keep going.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, student loan forgiveness, no tuition cost programs, for example, in teacher and student teaching. And I would harness those professionals and their ideas in teacher education and professional development and licensing to work with our colleges and universities to promote programs that could diversify our teaching force.
Thank you. Dr. Kerr?
I believe it's very important that we be intentional to make sure that we have culturally represented staff in all of our schools, especially with our special education teachers and educators. We're very intentional in Brown Deer at tapping our students on the shoulder or our paraprofessionals to go into these roles. And so we did a program in Brown Deer called Project Invest, where we paid for a paraprofessional to get the special education training, and then they were allowed to do their student teaching and get paid. So that didn't become a barrier to them becoming a teacher. So I do believe it's very important that we understand what are the barriers. And I would also like to create an office of diversity and inclusion that would not only would allow teacher recruitment to be an important part of that, but giving our Black and Brown, our BIPOC communities a voice and a seat at the table.
Students with disabilities often face uncertain employment futures as they reach adulthood. The unemployment rate ranges from 40% to 70%, and it's all depending on disability. What do schools need to do differently to lessen the gap between the employment futures of students with disabilities and their non-disabled peers? 1 minute for this question. Dr. Kerr.
Well, certainly the pandemic has exacerbated all of these concerns here with making sure that our kids can get employment because of the pandemic. But what I think we need to do is we need to expand our life skills transition program so that our kids are in the workforce earlier in high school. Let's not wait till they're juniors or seniors. Let's make sure that they're getting into the community, understanding what the possibilities are, and doing internships or having some kind of work-based experiences. We also have a special class where our kids run the Falcon Express Cafe. So they're learning these important job skills, just like they would be at Starbucks. So again, it's giving them these experiences that they can transition into the community and be employed and earn a living wage.
Yeah, absolutely. All kids need to have these skills, but yes, it is an imperative for the disability community. And it's something that I grapple with every day as a superintendent and also as a parent of a student with disabilities. And I believe that transition planning is really important and we need to start it early. I think by the time they're in high school, that's really too late, of course, depending on their abilities. But we also need to identify a coordinated set of activities, perhaps skills, interests, passions, and hobbies, and nurture those. We need to set goals and set a results-oriented process for our kids. We should also have a job coach with our kids, and identify people in the community who will be willing to work with kids on these skills in a job setting. There's lots of opportunities. Again, it's an inclusive practice, getting kids with disabilities into these settings, and then also getting used to seeing kids like themselves out in these settings.
As students approach adulthood, teachers are often the first to talk with families about guardianship. Teachers may have limited understanding of other options, such as the less restrictive supported decision-making, resulting in unnecessary guardianships that strip all rights away. What would you do to ensure that families are made aware of all options to make a truly informed decision? 1 minute, Dr. Underly.
Yes. There certainly is a lot of education that needs to happen, and as part of a student's IEP and the IEP team, but also with community resources, disabilities attorneys, just basically being a part of that student's team to help everybody make the best and most informed decision, and also having, like you said, the family being, certainly involved, but also the student too. The student should have a voice, especially when it comes to guardianship.
Dr. Kerr?
I also agree that a student should have a voice, but I also think it's important that everyone is educated about what all the rights are and the understanding of what guardianship means. And that means the case manager or that special education teacher who's working with that student and that family for probably over time to have that great relationship so they can talk about anything. And I think it's important that this kind of information is shared with parents, whether it's in a packet or a folder or online. But these are the kind of conversations that need to be happening all throughout a child's career, especially as they're transitioning out of the school. And so that could happen at parent-teacher conferences or IEP annual reviews. But again, it's that communication piece that's really critical. And then I would love it to see the student very involved in this process too, because I would want him or her to ask questions as well, because they're going to be making lots of decisions as they go out into the workforce.
The voter turnout rate for people with disabilities is historically lower than that of people without disabilities. Many people with disabilities are not informed about their voting rights, including the right to accommodations such as curbside voting, designating someone to assist them to complete their ballot, or use of an accessible voting machine. As an educator, how did you address the need for the transition curriculum to include education about voting rights and accommodations? And how will DPI address this under your leadership? 1 minute, Dr. Kerr.
In Brown Deer, we worked with our local village of Brown Deer to make sure that our students were registered to vote. They would come in during the different activities, the school events in the evenings, and even during the lunch hour to register some of our students. And I also think it's a great opportunity to work with a group like yourself, the Wisconsin Disability Vote Coalition, to make sure that we are addressing these issues and making sure that this information is readily available and people understand all the options in terms of the rights and accommodations, because we want everyone to be civically engaged. And that is critical to our overall success as a community and society.
Yes, absolutely. Making sure that students are able to register to vote, providing the clerk to come into the school district and work with the teachers and the students to register them. Also working with parents and making sure parents are informed about their rights to vote too, so that they could also be advocates for the disability rights community. Working with community groups such as yourselves, Disability Votes Coalition. Understanding all the accommodations that are available and making sure that they're being followed. I think that is absolutely important as well. I think often, people are afraid of what they don't know and that people don't know how to advocate for themselves. So certainly understanding that they have a right to vote and that they have a right to ask for accommodations. And then also advocating with the state legislature or advocating towards the state legislature to make sure that voting rights are protected, especially everybody's voting rights, but certainly those in the disability community, which when you look at, making sure that everything is accessible, making sure that the rules are clear, they don't change frequently. I know we've got a lot of work to do in Wisconsin on that, but ensuring that people have untethered access to absentee voting, also in early voting too, so they can vote when they're able.
Well, because you two ladies have done such a great job tonight, we're going to throw 2 bonus questions your way.
Thank you.
No, thank you. You're making this very interesting for us. Thank you very much. Okay, so this first question, and it's not going to be on the screen. We apologize.
Okay.
What innovative ideas do you have to improve family engagement in special education, especially in low income and limited English proficiency households? You have 1 minute to answer this question. And Dr. Underly, we will begin with you.
I love this lightning round. Thank you so much.
Right.
As far as parent involvement for students with disabilities, there's 2 types. There's home-based and then there's also school-based. Parents are course, vital to the IEP process. They provide information on their child's strengths and their weaknesses at home, background information on their child's history and development, important information on family factors, and things that may affect their child's learning, but certainly it needs to go beyond that. So when you think of home-based, certainly having home visits is also a great way to incorporate parent involvement, demonstrating activities that parents enjoy doing with their kids at home, transferring those to school, making sure also that school is welcoming and accessible for parents, even parents with disabilities. I think that's another factor too.
Dr. Kerr?
I love the idea of going to the people approach. So we like to go to the families to help support them, to make them feel more comfortable. So like every year at Bradley Crossing for registration, instead of having our parents come to the school to register, we would go to them at their complex where they lived. We'd have a big festival and like a hot dog and a barbecue, and we'd pass out school supplies and backpacks. And then we got a chance to really talk with the parents, and we talked with the kids, and we got a chance to socialize with the other parents. So I believe it requires a combination of school, home, and community-based activities to bring people together.
Okay, thank you. And our last question. Wisconsin state law requires school districts to report seclusion and restraint numbers directly to DPI. However, there isn't much in state law regarding enforcement of this law or the restrictions on how seclusion and restraint are used in schools. How would you approach using these statistics? And what would you do if there is evidence that schools are not properly reporting seclusion and restraint events? Do you believe banning the use of seclusion and restraint is a goal we should pursue? 2 minutes on this question. Dr. Kerr, we'll go with you.
Thank you. First of all, we need to tighten up what the expectations are in the law. I think we need to be very specific and explicit on why we're collecting this information and how it's going to be done. So in Brown Deer, we had an annual report. We made sure that our teachers and our special ed directors were accountable for giving that report to the board, and the community understood it as well because it happened the same time every year. I think it was April or May. But we also made sure our teachers understood the importance of filing those reports whenever a situation occurred. And so I don't think we should be hiding anything. I think we need to be fully transparent. And I would like to see the seclusion and restraint data really diminish. And as we work on this plan together in school communities and staff, and making sure people have the appropriate training to understand what the law is and what the requirements are, and then the DPI would have to hold those school districts accountable.
Yeah, it is the law, that all schools have to report this data to DPI annually, and they also need to report it to their school boards annually as well. Every time a seclusion and restraint occurs, the IEP team or the group of teachers need to meet and discuss it. And I think that is a worthy goal, to make sure that we eventually phase out seclusion and restraint. And every effort should be made, obviously, to prevent the need for that use of restraint. And, when you think about the reporting and you think about the data, as far as any behavioral intervention should be consistent with a child's rights to be treated with dignity and free from abuse. And, these restraints should never be used as a punishment or as a discipline, as a means of coercion or retaliation, for example, or heaven forbid, as convenience too. So it's important that it is documented. It is important that that information is reported. We certainly do need better policies, perhaps at the local level, on the use of seclusion and restraint. And again, it needs to apply to all children, and we're not, just using it on children with a disability. So data is important, and using that data to move forward to make decisions on how we could certainly phase it out would be a very positive step, in my opinion.
Thank you. And now we will hear your closing statements. And Dr. Undley, we'll begin with you.
Sorry, I think I was muted. I apologize. So, as far as, there's a lot that I'm optimistic about, for the future of Wisconsin. The agenda that I crafted before the pandemic. These are programs and research-based ideas that I feel that every kid in Wisconsin should have access to, like early childhood programming, ideas for teacher recruitment and retention, better ways to access mental health resources in our schools, using, the Blue Ribbon Commission, for example, to redo our funding formula in the state of Wisconsin so we can make sure that all kids have opportunities to be successful. And that's ultimately what I want. I want every child every day to be successful in Wisconsin. And, as a superintendent this past year, this was the most challenging year. And I am still optimistic. I feel that when we come through this better on the other side, we'll learn some really good lessons, and our state and our schools will be better for it. I'm the only candidate, like I said, who is running right now during a pandemic and leading a school district. I have over 20 years of experience in every facet of education, and I know how to balance a budget. I know how to do more with less. We've passed 2 referendums just in my tenure, and I have a very strong record of advocacy for public schools, but most of all, for all kids in our schools. So again, I have the skills, the experience, and the perspective needed to take the helmet DPI, and I can't wait to get started. So I hope you will vote on April 6th. So thank you. Thank you for being here tonight and allowing me to be here with you.
Dr. Kerr?
Well, thank you very much. This has been a great opportunity. Great questions tonight. These are very important issues for all of us, especially as we recover from this pandemic. And that's why at this time in history, I feel that I'm the best candidate because I have the most qualifications and experience, and I'm uniquely prepared to lead the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction. My passion for serving all kids for the last 40 plus years, I've worked in all sectors of education, and I've had experience at the local, state, and national level advocating and changing law and getting federal funds to support our schools. We are all facing enormous learning losses for all of our kids if we don't get back to school today. And I can't emphasize how important that is. Our schools can't do it alone, but we can certainly unify all of our efforts and do this together. And so my track record of closing achievement gaps in public schools, having one of the highest graduation rates, and ensuring success for all kids through character education really sets me apart from Dr. Underly. So thank you so much for this opportunity today. Don't forget to vote April 6th, kerforkids.com if you want to learn more about me. And thank you again. What a wonderful forum.
Thank you to the candidates and to all of you who are joining us for this very informative conversation. I'm now going to turn it over to Wendy Hine from DRW and the Disability Vote Coalition. Wendy?
Hi, thank you for joining us tonight. We hope that today's forum helped prepare you for the spring April 6th election. We encourage everyone to go and check your voter registration information at myvote.wi.gov. Make sure it's current. If you're not registered, you can register online at MyVote, and you can also request an absentee ballot there. We just encourage you to get out and vote. If you have any obstacles with voting, if there are difficulties that you need help with, you see our phone number there on the screen, 844-347-8683. Please call. We're happy to help you problem solve and figure out how to get your vote cast. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. And we just encourage you to get out and vote.
This program is a production of WisconsinEye, an independent, nonpartisan, nonprofit media network with a mission to inform, educate, and engage the citizens of Wisconsin. WisconsinEye is the nation's first and only independently funded state civics broadcast network, providing gavel-to-gavel access to government proceedings and events at the state capitol.